Okay, we have a few topics today that we've come up with. We're going to start with one that I saw someone ask on Twitter a week or two ago, and it basically is bad writing. Does it exist in self-publishing and traditional publishing? What do you think when you see bad writing? Does bad writing give self-publishing or traditional publishing a bad name? Should there be more checks and balances to filter out bad writing? And I'll just give what I said in response to this person on Twitter, and then I think we'll go to Richard, who might take up the rest of our time on the
I think so.
topic. But basically, I said there's bad writing everywhere. It doesn't matter self-publishing, traditional publishing. It's in both venues, and um, I don't think there should be a filter in self-publishing because the whole point of self-publishing is you're essentially doing it would ruin the whole concept behind self-publishing. And I say that as frustrated as I am by the reputation some people think of in terms of self-publishing, that it's all crap, so they never buy a book by someone who's self-published or independently published. But at the same time, I wouldn't want self-publishing to have a gatekeeper, because then it becomes like traditional publishing. And I think I made a comment about bad writing is subjective. I mean, my bad writing might be something that one of you thinks was a great book, um, or my what I would consider to be bad writing. So I think it's kind of a difficult thing, as with most things, to have a one size fits all kind of a answer to this. So, Richard.
Okay. So when I saw the question, I definitely hit an answer right away, but then my brain does this thing sometimes to give perspective. And I started thinking about, I just want to put this out there, regardless of what we're talking about, but just to give people, again, a bigger, broader view of writing before people, who are, may have also seen the question go, oh, yeah, I've seen bad writing, et cetera. The first thing is I thought of, the subjective quality, like you mentioned. And it really hit me because writing is both an art form. I'm at the highest level now. It's meted all the way up. Okay. Writing is both an art form and probably humanity's most important tool. It is a tool, not just an art form. So I started thinking, because could you ever say paintings and music, et cetera, is bad? Well, people do, but then someone else comes along and says, yes, but that atonal sound is, et cetera, or the artist is intentionally doing whatever. So there's always a lot of subjective quality on it. And writing can be like that too. You've seen poetry especially, right, can be the rules of writing are not as important as the choice of word and intention, et cetera. So I started looking at that and thinking about that. And the idea is, like I said, that writing also on the flip side is a tool. And when you think of it as a tool of communication, then you have to consider writing as a whole is more, again, more than just an art form, but it's also more than just what, I think authors are generally storytellers, as I also say. You have, as Mark, legal writing, and there are rules about legal writing. And those rules are completely different than the rules of creative writing. And even, they have creative writing, then you have, writing for terms in terms of biography, et cetera. I taught for quite a while experimental methodology, and there's in psychology there's a specific APA guide for doing studies, writing studies. Again, there's a formula and format, and bad writing there would be something like being wordy or descriptive where it's irrelevant, but sometimes you need that in creative writing. So you've got art versus tool, and writing spans both, and so you can say, well, there's subjective in the art world, and you'll never be able to say that's bad, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much people agree, you never really can get there. Writing, though, there are writing tools where you can literally say that is poorly written because of the kind of communication necessary. So a technical journal, a legal document, right? You just can't have vagaries all over a legal document, or you've got a very bad legal document. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, that before any of us say, and we can say, yeah, I read something, I thought it was poorly written. be aware that we're just talking about maybe the technical aspects, but not the subjective artistic aspects. So that's what I wanted to put everything in, because I don't think people really consider writing when they think of it as an art form that it's more than that. Is that okay?
Richard, you have at least 30 more minutes to fill.
Well, let me just give a quick
So
answer to the question. No, I know, but let me.
yeah.
Yes, I have seen bad writing in independent, indie stuff, but a lot of that was from people who were just putting stuff out there to make money. Like I scam people, literally. I know my friend's brother created these ridiculous guides and just kept changing the title to 4 steps to whatever, 10 easy ways to whatever, and then you download it, you pay for it down. This is before they allowed for refunds down, and the stuff in it was gibberish. He figured even if you only made 1 penny per 100 people, if 1 million people down, you're making a small fortune, right? And it was terrible, and it's offensive. But I've had to, this is my only thing, is that I've had to beta read for people stuff, and some of it I think was very poorly written, but again, I didn't want to say it's poorly written. I just went through and would correct what I found with some grammatical errors, et cetera, and maybe give some high level about flow. But I can't be the judge. I can't be a gatekeeper on that, because that's where you get into subjective, you know? And does that affect indie publishing? Only in terms of the volume. There's a lot more out there. So of course, it's very easy to go out there and find something that may be considered poorly written from a technical aspect easily. But that's, because of the incredible volume. But at the same time, I have found lots of poorly written work in the published industry. I've also found recently, in the last few years, technical errors, grammar, et cetera, that get missed because, I happen to feel, I don't know the stats, but that the publishing industry is cut to the bare bones as far as editors and stuff like that, copy editors. So whatever people want to malign on indie publishing, it exists in traditional publishing. Okay, now I'm done.
Okay, I'll go next with this. Because of the subjective thing, I won't even mention things that bug me personally about different things I've read. Now, as far as indie versus trad, I think a lot of people do just assume that self-published works are going to be crap, and that, of course, is not true. We know that because we've done it and all that. So, and I think that's unfortunate, but I'm not sure what can be done to get rid of this notion, except to keep putting out good books and hoping someone picks them up. But I really don't know. Anyway, I think the thing that I would call bad writing is things I notice when I'm proofreading or editing my own stuff. Awkward phrasing or overuse of certain words, or that kind of mechanical stuff. And I think that it's really up to authors or publishers in the trad world to make sure to minimize that, to get rid of it, because that's part of the problem with self-publishing, is that there's been too much of that kind of just basic grammar and prose style. And I think it's up to us to polish it up. And I think you're right, Mark. We don't need gatekeepers. The reader is the ultimate gatekeeper, and there's enough out there now with both trad and indie publishing that you can always find something. If you pick up a book and it doesn't read well for you, you just scrap it and move on. That's just the way it is now. And it's up to the individual author, especially us indies, to polish up our prose, to minimize because it's a communication tool, whether artistic or for business purposes or legal purposes. It's up to each writer to be careful with their writing and make it as good as they can. So, but yeah, there's always going to be different types of bad writing out there, whether it's subjective opinion or just lack of polishing. So that's pretty well what I have to say about that.
Bertel, before you go, something Audrey said actually triggered something else in my mind. I don't, how can I say it? I think people should, though, cut a little bit of slack for the indie authors, because it costs a fortune to get, and instead of all the stuff that traditional publishers have behind them. So, it's a person doing their best sometimes on their own and with the limited, and we don't, as you all know, we don't make, anything to support that. So just, yeah, I think bear that in mind. I don't think it's, not saying to be unfair, but there is a balance to strike. If you pick up an indie book and you start noticing some small minor errors, just maybe remember that if that person had resources that could disappear like that. Sorry, Bertha.
Well, I want to pick up on something you said there, which is that I'm beta reading a book for an indie writer right now. And, yes, I find certain little grammatical errors, typos, things like that. I would never say this author is a bad writer. He's a fantastic writer, actually. But yes, it's very hard as, an indie author to take care of things like that. So you can't, I do think there are some people who will say, oh, the book is ruined because he said I when he should have said me or something like that. It's like you don't want to be a person like that. One issue like that will not ruin a story. Now, so to the question more of bad writing. Does anybody here know the name Edward Bulwer Lytton?
Oh, isn't that the contest for the worst opening line or something like that?
Oh,
He did like purple prose is what they would call it. Just the most famous line of his is "It was a dark and stormy night."
Yes.
And so yes, that everybody would say, well, that's bad writing. They have a whole contest for bad writing. On the other hand, can you even call that bad writing? He wrote sometime in the 1800s, and we still know his phrase. So was it even bad? It's a question I have, and I actually was thinking about this because I was started, of course, thinking about Lovecraft, who, in my opinion, from a technical point of view, Lovecraft was, well, you could justifiably call him a bad writer. I think he used all these adjectives. It would be like 3 adjectives to say it was dark or something. And it's sort of over the top almost. But we still read him. And he influenced a lot of people. He influenced me and Audrey. So can you say he was a bad writer? I reread his stuff regularly because I find the stories and concepts interesting, even though you might say, well, from a technical perspective, this is not what anybody would teach you. There's not going to be a style guide that's like how to write like H.P. Lovecraft, but something about his stuff works. So this goes back to the subjective quality of what might from certain perspectives be called bad writing. I don't even know if it is bad writing. So that can exist in the indie world. It can exist in the traditionally published world. And I think if you have gatekeepers, the gatekeepers will the problem with that is they're subject to fads and rules of writing. So they'll get it in their heads that what's the thing now? Prologues, no one should ever have a prologue or something. And so
chapter titles are gone, supposedly.
What chapter titles?
Yeah.
They'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, Professor Tolkien, your book has a prologue. We can't publish this. So yeah, that's why I think like everyone here, I'm pretty much against the idea of gatekeepers. It's better. I would rather wade through a ton of bad writing to find something really original than just be like, know that, I know what I'm going to get. I know it will be carefully curated by somebody to make sure I get what I want.
Well, yeah, that's the thing about gatekeepers is they have their own ideas about what's bad and what's good, and if they don't happen to coincide with many of the readers, then those readers are going to be shorted. But yeah, the more I think about this, the more complicated it gets, and I really think there's no actual answer to this question, except we all agree about no gatekeepers for indie publishing. So yeah, the other thing, oh yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of all these books I've read where I think the writing, just the prose style was really bad, and yet they have tons of 5-star ratings and people saying how wonderful it is. And like if you have a fast-moving story with a lot of action and sort of things that people want to find out, like is this person going to escape from the peril that they're in, or how who actually did the murder, or they're racing toward trying to experience this stuff. They're not going to notice little nuances of repeated words or clunky sentences or whatever. So I think that explains a lot of it. Whereas I'm reading sometimes and I notice all that stuff just because that's the curse of being a writer, is you can't just read sort of mindlessly. You kind of pick up on things. Like when I was reading something or other, it wasn't very good anyway, but I mean, the plot wasn't that great. But I kept noticing that people were murmuring a lot. I've mentioned this before. Like even in some kind of tense scene where people have guns and somebody murmurs, "Drop the gun." I mean, come on. So I think the person who wrote that was a romance writer who was, trying to do in her go-to dialogue tag or something. And that's the other thing. I mean, somebody mentioned the weirdest piece of writing advice, and I'd say for me, it's the not to use the word "was," while you're telling a story. Was is apparently inherently passive and just should not be used. So just think about that for a while. I just thought I'd throw that one out.
What?
Yeah, was.
So, Richard, you mentioned beta reading manuscripts or things for other writers. I've probably read slash edited slash beta read somewhere around 50 manuscripts over the last 10 years for other writers. And one of the things that I don't do is judge the quality of the writing. I'm basically just there to catch things. But there, out of all of those, there were probably less than five, I would say maybe three, that I just couldn't finish because it was bad. And it's like I can't do this one. And I would let them know it just for whatever reason it's not for me. I wouldn't tell them it was bad, but it's like this story is not for me, and I can't get through it. The thing that I'm thinking about listening to the three of you is I think there's and Richard, you might have touched on this, but there's technically bad writing. And in terms of fiction, that means typos or just basic problems that are not subjective that I think we see in any kind of writing now, whether it's independent or traditional. And it's like you said, the traditional publishing world is so what I forget the word you use, but they're on bare bones. Yeah, they don't have the editing resources that they used to have, and so you see it more and more in traditional publishing. But then there's the subjective, and I go back to what I've said for almost 20 years now, and I've said numerous times here, the one rule of writing is write a good story. And if you write a good story, maybe the quality of the writing doesn't matter. And I can think of some examples. And I'm going to use names. I blogged about this book that I read earlier this year. I think it was by Mark Halperin. Is that the conservative right wing commentator, or is that the actual author, Berthold?
No, the author. It's okay. One is Halperin, I think, is the writer, and Halperin is the commentator.
Okay, well, it's the writer, and he writes.
I apologize if I have that backwards, everybody.
I think you're right. But anyway, he writes, I guess they're like military novels. And I read one probably almost 30 years ago. And then at somebody's recommendation, I picked up another one earlier this year, and I read it. And I would say it was horribly written, but it was a good story. And I finished it because it was a good story. And I think that's the key is, do you write a story that people want to read and get to the finish? The other example, and I don't remember the name, I think it was a indie book, and I think I've mentioned this before too. I know I blogged about it after I read it. I read it until there were about 12 pages left. And then I stopped because I just didn't care anymore. You know, I mean, so it's like, what's bad writing? I don't know. As the Supreme Court says, you know it when you see it.
Bertolt, you said something about the fads of the time, and that made me think of something I told someone once a while back. Because I always talk about Victorian writers, et cetera, and how sometimes we don't understand the perspective. And I've mentioned that here too, of having, more idle time. But if Hemingway wrote at the time of Dickens, he would have been hated. And if Dickens wrote at the time of Hemingway, he would have been hated. He would never, neither one would have, because Hemingway would have been seen as too sparse and bare, and missed all this, opportunity for, to engage the reader back in the Victorian days. And then vice versa, Dickens would have been seen like too flowery, too long with the passages. Just get to the point, So, and there was something Mark said, but I think it's already gone out of my head. And that's a prerogative once you pass 65. So anyway.
Well, what you said, Mark, I'm just going to add on to that, and I'm going to pile on our favorite target, The Great Gatsby. I mean, I mean, the writing in that, I would never call it bad writing. I think it's beautiful writing. He was, technically speaking, and not just in terms of no typos, but just the quality of the prose is beautiful, and that's probably why people still read the book. In terms of the plot, well, my opinion, there's nothing going on there. So, I mean, is that? But I wouldn't even call that bad writing. Exactly.
See, but there are actually probably more than two, but there are two levers you can play with. You can actually have, and I believe this, you can have a story, a novel that the plot is okay at best, but the characters are so engaging, right? It's a hook. Or the other way around, your characters can be kind of dullish. It doesn't matter because the plot, and murder mysteries are often like that. The plot is so gripping. There's the hook. I think in terms of The Great Gatsby, the characters and the plot, so you just have the writing. And you're right, the writing was beautiful in many places, but you need something to hook a reader in, and the two strongest tools we have are plot and character. If you get both, wow, that's really great. But
so let's talk about our other favorite target, Stephen King. I don't think he's a bad writer. I just think he's a tired writer, because he wrote, I think, some of the greatest books in his genre in his early years. The Shining, Pet Sematary, It, a few others that I think are just incredible stories. And I'll never, ever forget how terrified I was when I was reading The Shining at home alone on a Saturday night. Yes.
I'm just going to interject here that let's see, what is it? The man in black fled into the desert and the gunslinger followed is probably one of the greatest opening lines ever. So
I meant to add the first book in that series was also one of my favorites. It got destroyed later on, and we don't need to talk about that. But anyway, but it just, again, it's like you said, Richard, if there's a hook, that's what matters. It's like a song,
And different things appeal to different people. Like for some people, it's, if you have great characters, the rest doesn't matter. If you have a really good plot, the rest doesn't matter. But there's, those three elements: characters, plot, and the prose, the actual words. That's the vehicle that they're all riding in, right? The plot and the characters. And I think most casual readers will probably prefer good plot, good characters, and they don't really care about the prose. It's only people who write and read literary fiction, and they're kind of refined, and they look at words as the art form thing, and maybe they'll put up with sort of a weak plot. And I think you still need good characters. So I think the combination of beautiful writing and engaging characters is a winner. But if you have just beautiful writing and the characters and the plot are kind of lost in there, then it's sort of a dud. So yeah,
I think I'm one of those readers and writers who pays attention to prose last. That's not. I'm paying attention to the story, and hoping that it's interesting and pulls me along. And I don't know that prose is necessarily something I've always or regularly really paid that much attention to.
Yeah, it's more like the icing on the cake rather than the cake itself.
One of the topics we might have talked about is what is one of our favorite things that we've written? And one of the things that I was going to mention is the irreparable past, because unlike any other story I've written, I really did pay attention to the prose with that story because I was trying to achieve something with it. And so that's an example of where one example where I did pay attention to prose while I was writing.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think in my case, the two books I think are the best are the two She books, She Who Comes Forth and She Who Returns, because there I did kind of try to trim down the verbosity and keep things moving along, and they're shorter than the Herbert West novels. And I think on the whole, they could be called better books. I mean, I'd been writing longer by the time I published those, so I think it shows. But I have sort of a sentimental attachment to the Herbert West series, just because it was what I started with, and it's just closer to me. Let's put it that way.
For me, when the question was posed, I kind of short-circuited because I think it's not the actual work, it's the accomplishment. So my very first short story that I gave to people to read, I'm going to circle back to that for a minute, but my very first humorous essay, which I did put on the blogs about the months, I think it was the one about October, the other 8th month, whatever. The very first novel, obviously, The Devil and the Wolf. I'm not to say that I don't feel as proud of my second novel, because there were also things there that I did for the first time. I stayed in the lines for the first time and followed somebody else's stories away. So all of those, I'm proud of the accomplishment of completion, of doing it. There were words I wrote and phrases that I'm actually also proud of, but that was the first thing that came to me, is this sense of accomplishment. And by the way, I did come across, because this is a little side thing, I have some old PC hard drives that haven't been trashed. They were corrupted and everything, but someone gave me some software and I had to buy these cables, and I actually was able to dig up a few of my old short stories. And I was able to pull out the text from all the gibberish that was around it. Some I might be able to reconstruct. So I might actually release one on my website maybe next year. I don't know, if I feel like it's good enough. So, I remember one other thing, just because I'm a little distracted this week. It was a tough week. But Audrey, you talked about, when you're reading something, the pain of being a writer sometimes, but all of you, before Bertold, I don't want to interrupt your answer to this question, but the next one will be, do all of you ever, when you're reading some, especially trade published book, stop and reword and rewrite a paragraph or something? Okay, that's just, I do that sometimes. Like I'll get distracted. I say, if they had written it this way, only occasionally, but okay.
I'm going to start doing that, though. That's a good idea.
Maybe we should start putting that stuff on our blogs.
Maybe, it's just like you hit this.
I mean, Ernest Hemingway wrote it this way, but I would have written it.
Yeah, I mean, really, you hit something and you think, you know what? I don't know why that happens sometimes, but it'll just be one passage, short passage, and then my brain lets go again, and I passively read more. So
when I just think when I'm reading a book, not a manuscript or when I'm just reading to read, that whole part of my brain is shut down. And that's one of the reasons why reading is so important to me, because I can just be in the story and read.
Yeah, that's the best way. It's really, it kind of ruins the experience if you're in editor mode and you're noticing all kinds of little things and rewording paragraphs or sentences, and you kind of lose the story, even if it's a good story. So yeah, I think it's good to be able to shut that down. When you're in reading mode, you just kind of skim over all that stuff. And when you're working on your own things, that's when you notice it. But yeah, I was reading something the other day, really good story, and no problems at all. But there were just little tweaks. I thought, oh, if they'd moved this word over here and deleted this one, this sentence would have been better. And the brain just kind of throws that out, and you just have to kind of tell it, okay, settle down, just keep reading.
Anyway, Berthold, I'm sorry about that little side thing, but Berthold, your proud moment thing.
Well, see, this is bad because I suggested the question and I don't have a good answer to it. Probably, I mean, the one I think I'm proudest of that I worked the hardest on was my book, The Directorate. I worked hard on that. I poured a lot of effort into it. As I was saying the other day on Twitter, I realized looking back, it was at an absolutely crazy time in my life that I wrote it. Like just all sorts of stuff going on. And I'm still like, how did I manage to write that when there was all so there's stuff happening now when things are much more laid back, not much is going on. I can't get much writing done. It's kind of strange. But so I'd say as an accomplishment, I'm proudest of that one. The one that was the most fun to write was Vespasian Moon because it required essentially no effort. I was just like, I want to write my ultimate Halloween story, and this is going to be it. And so I was just having a blast.
I also wanted to add, Richard, you were mentioning that your favorites are kind of the first that you did of this and the first that you did of that type of thing. The first short story I submitted somewhere with the intent of it getting published, that was published, is kind of on that list for me. It's called The Smokers Club, and it was published by a thing called The First Line, where each issue, all the stories start with the same line. And so that was the first story I submitted, and it got published. And I also think the story just packs a lot into it. And if you can hear dogs barking in the background, my apologies, but the dogs are going crazy right now. But yeah, that was the other one I thought about.
By the way, Berthold, you brought up something that I know we talked about a little bit on Twitter, and you just mentioned, now that you have more free time and you're not writing, and you made me realize what was my main motivator for writing. And this is true all the times I wrote, it wasn't just to get something out. That's true. But I'm retired now, and things are kind of great here. And so I have a lot more free time, and I'm writing a lot less. That's not what I expected. And so I realized my prime motivator is something that I've been rewarded for my entire life. I would have papers due, I'd have things I'm supposed to have gone to, and things would get canceled. I get rewarded for procrastinating. And actually, the way I procrastinate, and I brought this up before, what started me writing something was I was finished painting. I still had one door to do, and the door's still not painted, but because I put things off. But it's the procrastination. And I have things that I need to do that I'm putting off, but it's not a priority anymore. I can put them off. So I've lost my spark, which is procrastinating.
I can see that because, yeah, and thinking back to this, it was like, yeah, when like I was moving and things are bad at work and all this stuff going on. And it's like, well, to get away from that, it was like, great, I can sit down and write a chapter and I'm off in my space station world here. And this is great. it was
going up and down in the elevator.
Absolutely.
That was it. I was supposed to do.
I don't know if there's a way to do this, but I kind of feel like this topic is something for a separate conversation next time, because I think we are all experiencing this in different ways right now. And I almost feel like we should, if anybody has a friend who's a therapist, we should invite them to participate, and that person can help us work through the struggle.
I am an armchair therapist, so I just bring up the armchair and
okay. What else was on our list? Weirdest piece of writing advice. I don't know that I have an answer to this question. I think Audrey mentioned not to use the word was. I would add that I'm sorry?
To minimize the use
yes,
of was.
I've also heard to minimize.
One author who does that. Reading this person's stories, which are very good, I can see that they have gone out of their way to describe things in such a way that they don't use was. So if you think of something, if you want to describe a thing, instead of just saying it was this color or this shape or this size, you kind of use an action word to represent that state. So that you say, instead of saying the house was red, you say the house glowed red in the sun or something. And that's fine. I think that's a good habit to have. If you find yourself droning on with repeated sentences that say was. I mean, sure, that's going to start to bug somebody, maybe. But I think if you do that for your whole novel, the writing becomes, that's what I call overwritten. It's where everything becomes too vivid and too, it's kind of like those giant screen TVs where you can see the pores in the guy's face, and it's just too much. And I figure it's time, just tone it down, use ordinary words for the ordinary stuff, and save the really intense words for the big scenes. That's just maybe.
I think I've heard the same thing about that. Am I wrong about? Am I
Yeah, a
wrong?
lot of people are anti that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do find
be removed.
typically in work related writing, I find myself using that and then looking at the sentence and saying, I didn't need to use it there.
Yeah.
So I take it out.
I have taken out most of my that's, but there are a couple that it's the structure of the sentence.
Right.
It kind of needs it. It's not used in the more common way it's used or something. But because I do know, I remember the rule of differentiating between that and which. If the clause is unnecessary, but you're still adding meaning, then you could use which. But that you use when. So, but I'm thinking if you get rid of that, then how do you know when to use which? But
I have to say, I don't worry about that and which. And it's true. That is pretty easy to do away with. I mean, you read your sentence, and if you see a that and you read the sentence without it mentally and it reads okay, then take it out. But it's a lot harder with was, which is sort of a kind of not actionless action word, a state of being. But anyway, yeah, I don't worry about that or which. I just kind of go along, and if it sounds okay, that's fine with me.
yeah,
Okay, what was, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I couldn't pull up in my mind the weirdest bit of advice, but there was a bit of advice, a classic one, that I realized I made the mistake of doing. And I saw someone on Twitter make a comment that they were writing a book and it failed for this reason. But I think it's a misinterpretation of this classic thing, which is write what you know. Because what a lot of first-time writers do, and I was starting to write a book called I Lost My Job, so I wrote this book, was the title. And it really fell apart because I was using people from my life. And yes, they were amalgams of people, but there was so much that was, and it was awful. Not completely, but enough. But this person was complaining the same thing. And I think, you know what, because I did that. I know these people, I know them well, but I don't think that's really what it should mean. In other words, when you're talking about the people, it's what you know about people, not the details you know about a person. Mm-hmm. So if I just put that out there, if people say write what you know, in general, it doesn't mean the details you know. It's the high level, what you know about a particular topic, what you know, you're familiar with the workplace. You don't write your workplace. You write the things that are common to workplaces, things like that. Because if you do that, besides people getting angry at you and getting bad phone calls, or somebody who was, got divorced from their wife coming up to you at another function saying, now I know who you were writing about. So yeah, I would say it's a good bit of advice, but don't take it literally.
Well, interestingly, my piece of weird advice I received is very close to that, which is basically you're not allowed to write about something unless you've done or experienced it first. This was with regard to riding a motorcycle. In this particular case, I'm writing about someone on a motorcycle, and they were like, have you ever been on a motorcycle? I say, no. So they were like, well, you can't write about it until you've done it.
Well, tell that to everyone who's written about being on a spaceship.
Well, I mean, this is exactly my point. Well, when the person said that, I was like, well, you're really going to hate the space battle in the next chapter. So, um,
This is edging into like where you get this advice that you should not write about a group, like an identifiable, like ethnic or social or whatever group of people, unless you belong to that group, which it really limits things. And it's funny, the thing I was thinking about this a while ago, and I realized that, okay, so ethnic and other groups often write about sort of standard white Anglo-Saxon type people. And they don't seem to be constricted by the fact that they're not of that group. So why is it okay to, I think I better shut up now, but it just,
Well, I was going to add that I see regularly the fact that men are not supposed to write female characters. I never see anybody say women should not write male characters.
yeah, it's true. That's the thing about these kinds of rules is if you kind of think about them hard enough or take them far enough, you find a thing like that. And then you
Yeah.
say, hey, but what about this? And that sort of suggests to me that those so-called rules aren't really that good.
I think I think for me it's a complex issue, meaning that you really need to stand back and figure out what you're trying to accomplish, what your goal for those characters are, and what the goal for your story is, and understand that there are sensitivities out there that you don't do things like stereotyping, etc. Because all you need to do is look at movies from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, and 90s of how black people are portrayed, and now looking back at them, you could actually cringe a bit, And here's how I kind of look at it: if it's a character, if there are characters in your book, and their ethnicity or sexuality is not an issue of the book or of that scene or anything, use whatever you want. They're just characters. And them out, and it may be based on people you knew, whatever, as I just said. But if you're writing about, I think, if I were going to write about a group of people in the 60s and maybe upheaval on the campuses, I know that's not a good, if I were going to write about someone who's gay, I would even then realize I don't share the same experiences, etc. And if that's the main thrust of the book, it might be worth at least getting a beta reader or two to go over to make sure you haven't misstepped. That's all. Because you should be able to. And in response, I think, and I don't know how right I am on this because this is a question I haven't given thought, but about, say, a gay writer writing about straight people, or white, or a black person writing about white people, or a woman writing about men, you do have to realize when you are inside the bubble, you don't see the differences. When you are outside the bubble, you get a view. And when you're growing up, let me try this. Growing up, I was exposed to the American family on TV, in stories, etc. And there is a look and there's a distinction. And I was, I say, flooded with all of that. Okay, that's why I do get annoyed when people say, they ban books because they're about gay characters, and when my children go say, well, gay people have been growing up with straight stories for their entire lives, and commercials, music, everything. It's billions of stories and songs and poems and everything, all written about straight people. So you're in there and you've got enough information that you could write about them. I could easily do that because I know, so I think you got to cut a little slack for the people, who are writing that, because they have enough information to do it. Our society and societies in general have just, made that the background of which everything is drawn. And it, again, I got sideswiped with this because it's a topic I know I get a little
I know what you're saying, Richard, and I think I'm gonna say it maybe a little bit differently and maybe even a little bit more strongly than you're doing, because I think you're trying to be diplomatic.
A little
Maybe.
bit.
But
Oh,
I get it, because there are groups of people in this country and any culture who are disenfranchised, bullied, treated horribly, and they want to be treated with sensitivity and appropriately if they're going to be characterized in fiction. And the sense is that people who are in that group are more capable of doing that than people who are not in that group.
probably more capable.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't want to dissuade. I've read stories and seen movies, etc., that really hit home, and they maybe weren't, not to me personally, but hit home even on the topic they were talking about, like opened my eyes. And those people may or may not have been in that particular group. So you can. I'm just saying that it's when I hear the reverse, which I heard, which is, why can women write about men,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
about women? It's not men can't write about women. Just you have to understand what you're writing about, and maybe your being in the bubble doesn't give you the view. That's why I was going to the bubble, being outside
Yeah.
the bubble,
Yeah.
and you're going to miss a tragic amount. So, but there are people who can do that. And I know, Mark, you got a lot of praise for your depiction of a woman in your last
Oh,
Yeah.
the basement, right?
okay.
I saw people online writing a lot of positive things about that and saying, it was a good perspective, and so you did it.
Well,
but I'm
and
just saying,
the dime, two of the three main characters are women, and I tell it that in alternating first person chapters of the three main characters. And I know Bertold has written some pieces that are essentially, female characters. And I mean, I don't know. I get it, but I also feel like part of writing fiction is experimenting and exploring. And I hope that when I do that, I do it the right way and I don't offend anybody. I can think of one story I have where the main character is gay. It's a short story that I submitted to the First Line and they didn't accept it. But again, part of the whole purpose for me in writing fiction is to experiment with different characters and different things in different ways to tell stories. So
I got
that's what
actually two things. The Devil and the Wolf, my two books. The Devil and the Wolf, when I wrote it, I mean, I've read a lot, and I grew up in Roman Catholic, et cetera, and I read a lot about, across the board about religions, et cetera. So I know that it's probably there are going to be people out there who will be offended by my take on good and evil, not realizing that I'm not being so literal. Angels aren't angels, devils aren't devils. I'm not getting either. They are caricatures of which I'm painting, as the framework, I'm painting people onto, looking at ourselves. But I do know people will see that and think it's like heresy or something. And the quick little side note was I got a radio interview and I released that book, and I was really excited, and it was, local radio station. I didn't even know, somebody gave someone the book and said, and they read it and they, well, I love this. Well, it was a fundamentalist Christian radio station, to the point that I found out that the week before, a local brewery at the last minute had their interview canceled because the owner of the station said alcohol is evil. So I thought, what's going to happen in my book? But it was incredibly warmly received, and because the person interviewing me even said right away, I get it. You're writing about good and bad in terms of humans, and everything went, and people didn't call in, and it wasn't. I expected pitchforks and torches outside the door, but there weren't. So yeah, kudos to those people too for having me on. But then when I was writing Perseus Kills His Grandfather, I knew someone at work who was from Greece. And I said, look, I want to write the names and everything, but I want to make sure they're they're done correctly, places, etc. And I know there's all these alternate spellings, and what do I do? And he said, do what the people here are used to seeing. He said, don't worry, no one's going to be offended that you didn't. I said, okay, because I just, take the moment to check. That's all. So, anyway,
Yeah, well, those are good points. That not to deny yourself the experience of writing from a point of view or about some group that you're not part of, but to do it with an awareness that where your limitations might be with that,
Yeah.
and to
and
always
still go with it. I mean, if maybe you want to stir up the pot, fine. But I don't want to stop anyone from experimenting and trying something. Just saying that if that's your goal, to write a story from that point of view, if you don't know a lot of people from that point of view, maybe get to know something.
Yeah.
That is excellent advice. I have nothing to add because that's like perfect.
Well, I'm sweating right now.
It was a good conversation.
Topic that is one of my buttons in a way, but
No, yeah, and it's understandable. And I think maybe I was a little bit too flippant in my comment, but
I think it's because we see these debates that get relitigated every day on Twitter, which is not, this would be my message to the world, is that Twitter is not the place to litigate anything.
I always tell, if you see a tweet that, especially a political one, that you agree with whatever, here's the secret to keep your sanity and blood pressure low. Don't look at the comments.
Yeah.
See the tweet, the person wrote, unless they have like one of two, then you're going to have to see what the second is, the third. But other than that, don't go deeper, because you're going to find the pits of humanity down there. And you'll need to take showers afterwards, and I'm talking like Silkwood showers. So don't read the comments. Just enjoy the tweets as they're presented.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I think we've covered it pretty well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, unless you guys have a session without me, and you're more than welcome to do it, we may not do this again until mid to late October. So I'll be gone for a while.
I'll leave that to Berthold and Audrey. If they want to do one, I'll do it. And if not, we can wait.
Yeah, we can wait and let some topics pile up. Make some notes, things that bug you, things that excite you. Yeah.
Maybe we'll do something like this, but not publish it and not let you know what we talked about.
That's fun. Also, I was going to say October, you're saying, Mark. I believe there's some holiday that comes up in October, isn't there?
Flag Day? Isn't Flag Day in October?
And wait, before we cut out, today, I'm going to push this now for you, Berthold. Today is officially, I want to put it on record, Little Halloween. Okay, because it's August 31st, and that is the 8th month of the year, but 8 in Latin is octo, so that's October. So that's why this is, like, from the Latin point of view, October 31st, which is Halloween. So I'm considering this Little Halloween, and the idea is on Little Halloween, you get candy and chocolate.
I like this. I like this plan a lot. Good. I'm sure we can convince Mark.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sure.
We'll start celebrating it.
Okay.
Oh. Well, this was a good chat.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, well, have a good trip, Mark.
Yes,
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.